Welcome to the GSAP Urban Planning Lectures in Planning Series, LIPS. We're absolutely delighted to have Seth Pinsky here today. The event is co-hosted with SIPA, and we're very pleased about that link. So I want to thank Esther Fuse, who's here, and all of the SIPA presence in the room as well. Next week, we will have Neil Lee, who will be speaking here on European inequalities, so we hope to see several of you here. I'll go ahead and introduce the speaker. All of you know his name. These are exciting times in New York City. Seth Pinsky is an attorney by training, and prior to joining the Economic Development Corporation in New York, he's been a lawyer, a financial analyst, and a graduate of Columbia College, where his work was in history before he went into law. He was appointed in 2008 as the president of the New York City Economic Development Corporation, and he's been there since 2003. Mayor Bloomberg appointed him in February of 2008 as the president. It's been an exciting time during his tenure as well. Several projects have been under his purview. He's worked towards the employment generation of several tens of thousands of jobs, attempts at new housing, lots and lots of commercial, cultural, community space developments in the city. Some of the most ambitious affordable housing programs in the city, including at Hunters Point South, revitalization programs in Coney Island, Willets Point reworking in various ways. We hope to hear more about all of these. There have also been elevated rail projects. There have been the Bronx Terminal Market redevelopments, work in Staten Island, and a very important effort that all of you will be paying attention to, which has to do with economic diversification within the city. Given the uncertainties about the financial sector, many of Seth Pinsky's efforts have been in improving financial services, continuation in the city, also spearheading diversification efforts in green jobs, the green sector, fashion, new media, bioscience, and industrial and maritime uses of the Brooklyn and Staten Island waterfronts. He has also been, before this, in the Financial Services Division of the Economic Development Corporation, and was involved in several development projects in the 5-borough area, including the World Trade Center projects, Hudson Yards, the new Yankees, and the Met Stadium projects. So he's someone we've been looking forward to having, and we're delighted that SIPA has co-hosted with us this time. So with no further ado, Seth Pinsky.
Thank you. It's great to be here back at Columbia. I wanted to take some time this afternoon and tell you a little bit about the state of the city's economy, and also to talk about the administration's efforts for economic recovery and growth. But before doing that, I just wanted to take 1 minute and explain what EDC is, because we're a little bit of a strange creature. We're not technically a city agency. We're actually an independent 501c3. We were organized originally a couple of decades ago when the city determined that it wasn't doing economic development as effectively and efficiently as it could, and so it basically outsourced some of its functions to EDC. Even though we are an independent agency, we work very closely with city government. The management of EDC, most of the board, myself, are appointed by the mayor. We operate under contract with the city government. So we're basically like a consulting firm with only one client, and that client is the city government. The advantage that we have is that we're not subject to all of the same rules and regulations that city agencies are subject to. So we're not subject to civil service. We're not unionized. We have different procurement rules, which means that we're generally able to operate on a faster timeline and hopefully to get things done less expensively as well. And our responsibilities as a result of our history, we're kind of a hodgepodge organization. We, for example, manage about 400 properties, mostly industrial and distribution properties on behalf of the city. We undertake capital construction projects on behalf of the city, usually having some connection to economic development. We have about $2 billion in capital projects under management. We sell surplus land on behalf of the city. So the city will say, we've got this underused parking garage, what should we do with it? And we'll put out an RFP to the public and try to get it developed to create jobs and new tax revenue. We do area-wide rezonings. One example in the last couple of years is Jamaica. We did a huge rezoning of Jamaica to try to encourage the growth of the central business district there. We administer tax incentives on behalf of the city. And we also do advisory work, both strategic advisory work. So the city will come to us and say, why is it that we're not more successful in X industry? And we'll do a study and make proposals for how the city can be more competitive. And also financial advisory work. So we'll act as kind of the internal investment bank on behalf of the city, usually in public-private partnerships. So with that as background, I wanted to turn now to a discussion of the state of the city's economy. And on that front, I've got some good news and some bad news that I wanted to share with you. And so I want to start with the bad news. Bad news is that I recently read that New York's mayor was quoted as saying the following: "This is the most gloomy period which New York has ever known. The number of failures is so great daily that I do not keep a record of them even in my mind." So what's the good news? The good news is that the New York mayor who uttered those words was not Michael Bloomberg, but someone named Philip Hone, and the year that they were uttered was 1837. And I think that this quote serves an important lesson for all of us, because it reminds us, as we navigate what undoubtedly are very difficult fiscal and economic waters ahead, that New York has been here before, and that each time the city has faced seemingly insurmountable odds, we not only overcame those obstacles, but we emerged on the other side a better and more prosperous city. And we don't even have to look back to the 19th century to remind us of this. All we have to do is look back to 2002, when Mayor Bloomberg first entered office. And at that time, as he stood on the steps of City Hall and he took the oath of office, the embers of the World Trade Center were literally still burning. And there were questions about whether New York would ever recover. Would businesses flee? Would people flee? And in fact, the opposite happened. We went through one of the greatest booms the city has ever known. The city achieved its highest bond rating in 80 years. We welcomed a record 47 million tourists in 2008 to the city, making us for the second year in a row the #1 tourist destination in the United States. We rezoned fully 1/6 of the land area of New York, 6,000 city blocks. And we've literally changed the physical city. In Hudson Yards, for example, in the district just west of Midtown, we laid the groundwork for the city's next great central business district, rezoning the area for 40 million square feet of commercial, residential, hotel, and retail space. Also, using a very creative financing mechanism, the city managed to raise $2 billion, which is sitting in the bank for this project, for the extension of the number 7 train from its current terminus at Times Square to 11th Avenue and 34th Street, which is the first major expansion of the subway in a generation. And work on that project is actually underway and is expected to be done in 5 or 6 years. Meanwhile, in Queens and in the Bronx, we, with an investment of about $300 or $400 million, the city induced the Mets and the Yankees to invest over $2 billion in private funds to create thousands of construction jobs, thousands of permanent jobs, new infrastructure, to take maintenance obligations off the books of the city, and to create over $130 million in net fiscal benefits to the city. And these projects will each be open in a matter of days, welcoming fans. And finally, in Lower Manhattan, at the scene of the World Trade Center, which I referenced a minute ago, though nobody is happy with the pace of redevelopment there, and though the mayor himself and the city don't actually control the site, it's controlled by Silverstein Properties, which owns the ground lease on the site, and the Port Authority, Using his bully pulpit, the mayor in 2006 was able to force the parties back to the table and renegotiate their agreement with one another after several groundbreakings that led to actually no redevelopment at the site. And so today, we actually see progress being made. We see One World Trade Center, the former Freedom Tower, is now 100 feet above street level on its way to its symbolic height of 1,776 feet. That will be done in 2013. And we see steel being laid for the memorial, which is, of course, the most important part of the redevelopment. And we anticipate the memorial to be open on September 11th in 2011, the 10th anniversary of those horrible attacks. And doubtless we'll hear more about missing deadlines and changed timelines, but the bottom line is this: thanks to the work of the mayor, things are happening at the World Trade Center, and that very important redevelopment is actually going forward. But let's face it, times once again are tough, and the city is facing new challenges. The number of employed city residents, for example, dropped by 36,000 people in January alone, the largest single-month decline in the history of this statistic, which has been kept since 1976. Wages in the city are expected to decline by $39 billion from $293 billion in 2008 to $254 billion in 2010. And as we all know, this downturn is having a disproportionate effect on Wall Street, which is, of course, a very important industry to the fiscal and economic well-being of the city. Because even though Wall Street employs only about 9% of private sector employees in New York, it actually accounts for 34% of private sector payroll. And so when you have a year like 2008, when you have the worst stock market decline since 1931, and you have $1 trillion or more in write-offs in the financial services industry, it can't help but hurt New York's fiscal well-being. And so we project that between fiscal year 2008 and fiscal year 2010, city revenues will drop by some $5 billion, from $42.8 billion to $37.1 billion. So what do we do? I think the natural instinct when faced with statistics like these is probably to despair. But that's not the approach of the Bloomberg administration. Instead, what we plan to do is we plan to move forward, and we have a three-part plan to address the economic downturn. And this three-part plan is all built around the theme of work. First of all, we're working to evaluate how to make government work better. Second of all, we're creating opportunities to ensure that New Yorkers have work. And third, we're undertaking substantial new investments in public works. So let's look at each part of this strategy. First of all, making government work more efficiently and more effectively. Fortunately, we actually began this work even before the economic downturn. In the last several years, as the economy was booming and the city was running record surpluses, the mayor made a point of saving several $billion from our surpluses in order to create a rainy day fund. And this rainy day fund is what we've been using over the course of the last year to year and a half to help us bridge the beginning of the downturn. And as a result of that, we haven't had to make as dramatic a series of cuts in our budget as we otherwise would have had to, which has been very helpful. But unfortunately, the rainy day fund is likely to be spent by the end of next fiscal year. And so we're also working to control the city's expenses. We, for example, are holding city-funded expenses essentially flat between fiscal year 2009 and fiscal year 2010, with those levels growing from about $43.2 billion to $43.4 billion. If you factor in inflation, it's either flat or maybe even a slight decline in real government spending. But what we're not going to do is make the mistakes that the city made in the 1970s, when we let crime get out of control, when the streets became dirty, when we stopped investing in infrastructure, because that was truly a disaster for the city. It was penny-wise and probably more than 1 pound foolish. So what we're going to do, even if it requires raising revenues, raising taxes, which undoubtedly we're going to have to do, we're going to make sure that we maintain a certain minimum level of city services, because what we understand is that quality of life is not just a campaign slogan, but it's good economic development policy. We're also working to make government more business-friendly. And so the mayor, in his State of the City address in January of this year, announced a proposal to end or significantly reduce the unincorporated business tax, which is a form of double taxation that's, I think, virtually unique to New York City, that affects many, many small businesses in the city. We think that this proposal could lower taxes for 17,000 businesses across New York. Now, unfortunately, we need approval in Albany to get this done, and as many of you may know, that's never a guarantee, but this is something that we feel very strongly about and we're working very hard to get approved. Similarly, EDC recently launched an innovative loan guarantee program that we call Capital Access, which will leverage about $5 million in EDC funds to induce somewhere between $14 and $15 million in new loan activity, which we think will help hundreds of micro and small businesses meet their working capital needs. The next prong of our three-prong strategy is creating work opportunities for New York. Let me start by saying that we believe that it is absolutely essential for the future of the city that New York remain the world's financial services capital. And so the mayor, about 3 or 4 weeks ago, unveiled an 11-part strategy that uses a very modest city investment of about $15 million over the next 5 years to induce an additional $30 million in federal assistance and millions more from the private sector. And our plan is basically designed essentially to achieve 3 ends. One is to strengthen the financial services infrastructure, things like exchanges and other utilities that make New York the financial services capital of the world. We're also going to grow segments of the financial services industry in which New York has traditionally been underrepresented, areas like venture capital and angel investing. And finally, we're going to seek to expand entrepreneurial activity in the city. And this isn't something that's geared just towards financial services. It's geared towards really all sectors of the city's economy. But what we see is that tens of thousands of very talented people are losing their jobs in New York and have lost their jobs over the last several months. And it is key for us to retain those people here, to retain those talents, because that is New York's #1 natural resource. And so we have a series of initiatives that are designed to increase entrepreneurial activity as well. And we think that these initiatives alone will generate somewhere around 25,000 new jobs and several hundreds of millions of dollars in new economic activity over the next 10 years. But even with these initiatives, we know that we need to diversify the economy further, and that we need to develop counter-cyclicals to Wall Street. And so we're focused on a number of industries, and let me just give you a couple of quick examples. One of them is bioscience. Now, in bioscience, what's interesting is that New York actually does very well on 2 ends of the spectrum. On the one hand, we are a great headquarters city. We are the headquarters of Bristol-Myers Squibb, we're the headquarters of Forest Laboratories, of Pfizer. And on the other hand, we also do very well with basic science. New York City is the #2 recipient of NIH funding in the United States. And every year, our 9 academic research institutions, including Columbia, turn out somewhere between 20 and 30 new businesses each year. But what's happened over the last several years is that almost every one of those new businesses ends up going somewhere else. And so we asked ourselves, how do we keep those new businesses here in New York? And what we realized was that what New York was missing was commercial lab space, where businesses could turn from basic ideas into viable businesses. And so we've made substantial investments in a number of fronts. 2 examples being the East River Science Park, which if you drive down the FDR Drive just north of Bellevue Hospital, you'll see a construction site. This will eventually be a 1.1 million square foot facility. The city put about $20 million in. We induced a private sector developer, Alexandria Real Estate, to put about $700 million into the project. The first phase of this project has actually topped out. It's a 300,000 square foot lab facility, and we expect it to be open for business in 2010, and the rest of the project will be built out thereafter. In addition, in Brooklyn, in Sunset Park, we've worked on a project that we call BioBat at the Brooklyn Army Terminal. And this project we're working on in conjunction with SUNY Downstate Medical Center and with the state of New York. And we're looking to create a facility which will have about 500,000 square feet of commercial lab space. And we're happy to say that we already have our first tenant at this facility, which is an organization called IAVI, which takes about 40,000 square feet in lab space, and they are one of the world's leading institutions seeking a vaccine for the AIDS virus. Meanwhile, another industry that we're seeking to promote is film and television production. Now, many of you may not remember this, but in the early part of this decade, film and television production in New York almost stopped entirely. And the reason for this was that there was a strike. And during the strike, producers took their shows and movies to other places, places like Toronto and Vancouver and elsewhere in the United States. And what they found when the strike was over was that you could do a lot of what you could do in New York and other places, and it was a lot cheaper than it was here. And we had a very hard time attracting businesses back. So early in the Bloomberg administration, we undertook a study of the industry to try to figure out what it would take to bring the industry back to New York. And what we found was that there was a price gap, which with a tax credit program, we could shrink substantially, not entirely, but shrink substantially in a way that would be meaningful to these productions. And we also found that with an investment in new production facilities, that there would be an inducement for people to come back. And we did both of these things, and we've seen expansions at the Kaufman Astoria Studios in Astoria. We're working with Silver Cup Studios in Long Island City, and we had the opening of a brand new facility, Steiner Studios, in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. And thanks to this work, we've seen an increase in shooting days in New York since 2002 of some 92%, which is extraordinary. And so along these lines, we're working to expand New York's presence in a number of other industries. These include media, green technology, higher education, and the arts. And we're expecting to have very specific sets of initiatives on each of these fronts that we'll be able to announce in the next couple of months. And this brings me to the last of our three-prong approach to economic recovery, and that's public works. So why invest in public works during an economic downturn? Well, there are really two reasons. One is the reason that I think you hear a lot of people in Washington and elsewhere talking about, which is that government spending on infrastructure keeps people employed through the economic downturn. And that's certainly an incentive for us to continue spending. But there's another reason, which is that we think that it's very important for New York to prepare itself for the economic recovery. And we know that the economic recovery will come. And a mistake that New York has made in the past is that it hasn't invested in creating development sites during downturns, so that when recoveries came, there was nowhere to build new places, new buildings, new facilities here in New York. And that's one of the reasons I think that when you drive down the West Side Highway and you look across at New Jersey, you see as much development there as you do. Many of those are developments that would have and should have happened in New York. So in 2009, our capital budget calls for us to spend over $10 billion, which is a record amount for the city, and it's a 5% increase even over 2008. And going forward, unfortunately, because of the economic downturn, it's likely that we are going to have to make cuts to our capital budget, and there's been some talk of cuts as much as 30% of our out-year capital budgets. But even with those cuts, it's important to keep this in perspective, even with those cuts, between fiscal year 2009 and fiscal year 2014, so 5 years, the amount that we would be spending in New York City would be 40% more than the 7 years before Mayor Bloomberg came into office. So we're still spending at near record levels. And in addition to that, we also think that we can backfill some of the cuts that we're making with federal stimulus funds. And we've identified over $5 billion in shovel-ready projects, and we're working very hard internally within the administration and with our partners in the state and at the federal government to make sure that New York gets its fair share of stimulus funds. So let me just give you 3 quick examples of some of the major capital projects that we're undertaking. The first of these is at Willets Point in Queens, which is located just to the east of the new Citi Field, the new Mets Stadium, and very close to LaGuardia Airport. This is a 62-acre site that literally is a toxic waste dump. This area has been underdeveloped, has lacked infrastructure for decades, and people since the days of Robert Moses have been seeking to redevelop it. Well, I'm proud to say that in November of last year, we finally convinced the City Council to pass a rezoning of the area, and so we're moving forward with that redevelopment. And the redevelopment that we're undertaking will eventually create over 5,000 units of new housing, 35% of which are to be affordable. It will create new retail, new convention center, new office space, new school, new open space, and will become the city's first LEED certified neighborhood, which is a distinction that we're really proud of. We have $400 million in the city's budget for this project, and we're working right now on beginning our infrastructure design work, and we hope to begin selecting a developer for the site shortly. Meanwhile, in Queens, along the East River, we're working on a project called Hunters Point South. This is a 30-acre site that formerly was owned by the Port Authority and by the state of New York. We passed the rezoning in the City Council for this project as well as in November, and we've rezoned this site for some 5,000 units of new housing, 60% of which are to be affordable to middle-income New Yorkers, teachers and nurses and police officers and firefighters and the kinds of service workers that the city desperately needs but has had a lot of trouble retaining because of the expensive housing. This is the largest middle-income housing development in the city since Starrett City was built. We have $222 million in capital in the budget for this project, another $92 million in housing subsidies. And we're expecting to complete acquisition of the site in a matter of a week or two from the Port Authority and the state. And we're hoping to break ground on infrastructure here before the end of this calendar year. And finally, we're not just looking at projects that have already passed through the city zoning process. We're also looking forward at new projects. And a big project that we're really focused on right now is Coney Island, which is not just a great Brooklyn icon, which it is, but is also home to 50,000 people, many of whom are desperately poor, live in public housing, have some of the longest commutes of any resident anywhere in the city, and lack basic infrastructure and services. So we've introduced a comprehensive plan which includes a 27-acre entertainment and amusement district, including a 9-acre mapped park for amusements, 500,000 square feet of new retail, 4,500 units of new housing, 20% of which are to be affordable. And we think that this project could create 25,000 construction jobs and 6,000 permanent jobs as it's built out. And we expect this project to go to the City Council for a vote sometime in August. So I started with a little bit of history, and I just want to end with a little bit of history. And I think that it's important for us to take a look back again. This time, let's look at the Great Depression. And it's important to remember that the Great Depression was far worse than anything that we're going through now. National unemployment hit 25%. 40% of the national banks failed. And the stock market lost nearly 90% of its value. But there were also people who had the courage to continue to push forward, to keep building and to keep investing. And the evidence of their forward thinking dots the city's landscape. Rockefeller Center, the Chrysler Building, the Empire State Building, all of these icons that define our city today were built during the Great Depression. And I think that we should take inspiration from this. And we should realize that if we keep focused on our vision for the future, and we support it with wise planning and execution, that our legacy of vibrancy and innovation will carry us forward, will get us through these difficult times, and that truly we can say, just like occurred after the Depression and occurred back in 1837 when Mayor Philip Hone observed how desperate times were, that we can truly say that the best times for New York are still in front of it. Thank you. Sure, I'm happy to take questions if anyone has them.
Hi, my name is Rachel. I'm actually a small business owner downtown Brooklyn and also a resident. Though I think everyone's for a better New York City, have you taken into consideration the negative effects? I'd like to use one example of the 2004 rezoning of downtown Brooklyn, which was supposed to create more office space and more jobs for the community. Instead, they didn't create office space. What was created was luxury condominiums. Till this day, sit more than 50% empty. I live in the community, I see it every day. And small businesses were displaced. Low-income and middle-income people are now displaced. There was the abuse of eminent domain for private development. And no one has taken any type of accountability for that. We've been reaching out for help. what are you going to do? I know, I don't think you were with the EDC in 2004, but what can you do to guarantee that, first of all, downtown Brooklyn still needs help. We have tons of luxury condominiums and so many people homeless. They're sitting there empty. Two is for Willets Point and Coney Island. I see the same thing happening there. 20% of affordable housing is not enough, and then you have to look at affordable for who. What are you going to do to guarantee that the actual backbone of New York, which is your small businesses, your city workers, your low-income people who work in retail shops, which is what keeps the city so vibrant, in fact, this country, to protect their assets in the city and also to give them a voice in the decision-making in their communities?
So there are a lot of questions that are wrapped up in that.
I want to take 2 or 3 questions.
Yeah, let me see if I can respond to it. With respect to downtown Brooklyn, I mean, we are working very hard to bring commercial development there. In fact, I'm headed to a meeting after this with an owner of a very large site that's looking to develop a major retail and office development there. We're hoping to make progress on that. I think you're actually wrong about the use of eminent domain in downtown Brooklyn. The only place where eminent domain was used was for a new park and parking garage. That's a fairly traditional use of eminent domain in the city, and we're moving forward with those plans. In terms of your broader question, first of all, on affordable housing, the mayor has the most aggressive affordable housing program in the country. We've made a commitment to build 165,000 new units of affordable housing. We're already halfway through that commitment, 7 years into his term. It was, I think, a 15-year commitment, something like that. And so we're making substantial progress on that. A number of these projects, Willets Point, where you have 35% affordable housing, Hunters Point South, where you have 60% affordable housing, will help us move that even further along. I think that, in terms of your question about for whom is this affordable, what you'll see is that the programs that the city has been pushing have reached levels of affordability that are much lower than affordable housing programs in the past reached. But we're trying to address the entire spectrum because we understand that the problem isn't just low-income people, it's also middle-income people. And another thing that I think is going to help with the issue that you're citing, which is an important issue, is unfortunately, it's the positive side of the economic downturn, which is that with the economic downturn, we already see rents are coming down, the cost of residential and commercial real estate is coming down, and that, I think, will do probably more than anything that we're doing to help keep New York affordable, because I agree with you 100%. What makes New York interesting is not just the big companies, it's not just wealthy people, it's the middle class, it's people, the working class people, the people who really keep New York working in a vibrant place.
Neil Lee from the London School of Economics. I thought it was really interesting stuff about the film industry and the way that you're sort of trying to diversify the economies, etc. And one of the things which has been a big issue in the UK, certainly, is the idea that in subsidising businesses to come to Manhattan, it's essentially a zero-sum game, and there's sort of, these jobs are going to be done in Manhattan, but they're essentially subsidised by the taxpayers to take place there, when they could be done more effectively elsewhere. And I was just wondering if you sort of considered that, and also if you have any dialogues with any sort of neighbouring region about it.
Well, there's always talk about wanting to get the region to cooperate more effectively, and I think that we probably have better relations right now with the region, the state, other states than administrations have in the past. But especially during an economic downturn, everyone's racing to try to get as much activity as they can because people are scared and desperate. That being said, this administration has really held the line, thank you, on tax incentives. We were given some tax benefits after September 11th that were federal dollars that were designed to bring Lower Manhattan back after the attacks, and we've used those extensively. But outside of those, we've only done 7 discretionary commercial retention deals in the city under Mayor Bloomberg, and that compares to something like 50 plus under the previous mayor. And so, we don't think that the way for New York to compete is by buying business for New York. Where we do make investments in projects, and we do occasionally make those investments, we always do a cost-benefit analysis. We ask ourselves, what would happen if we didn't give this benefit? What would the benefit be to the city? And then with this benefit or this investment, what is the benefit? And is there an increment? And is the increment sufficient to justify the investment that we have? We really take a return on investment approach. And I think that's different from the way most cities, certainly in the United States and probably in the world, approach these things. We think that the best way to attract business to New York is not through tax incentives or tax programs. It's by, one, making sure that we're continuing to attract the best and the brightest to the city, and two, by making sure that New York is a place that people want to live. And that means keeping the streets safe, keeping our infrastructure working, keeping our streets clean. And those are all things that I think we've been enormously successful at. In fact, I was at an event 2 days ago with the mayor, and he was saying that, and I think I have this statistic right, that for the first 3 months of this year, the murder rate in New York is actually down 25% from last year, which was the second lowest on record. So we're continuing to make progress on that front. And that's really where I think that you make a difference with companies. Because if talented people are in New York, businesses will follow them. If talented people leave New York, then it's going to be much harder for us to succeed.
Regarding Willets Point, you refer to the area as a toxic dump. And I mean, just from what I know about the area, I would think a lot of people that have businesses currently in that zone would disagree with that, especially the times I've been there. It seemed like quite a thriving auto business community. What are like the decisions made that this would be a designated place for redevelopment? Especially like where are these businesses going to go? Also, I know there's issues with flooding in that neighborhood, and is it smart to put housing in an area that floods a lot?
First of all, I think if you actually talk to the business owners, which we've done a lot of, they would agree that it's a toxic waste dump. That doesn't mean that they want to leave Willets Point, but the conditions are truly horrific, and it's been leaching oil and petroleum byproducts into Flushing River and into the Long Island Sound for decades, which is truly a serious public health issue. In terms of the businesses, we're working very hard with them to relocate as many of them as possible. I think that by the time we're done, the vast majority of jobs that are located in Willets Point will remain in the city, in new and better locations. In terms of the flooding, the reason it floods is because this was a marsh, and it was filled in during the late part of the 19th century, early part of the 20th century, I can't remember, when it was used as a dumping ground for coal ash. And in fact, if you read The Great Gatsby, there are references to driving by this glowing embers, which is the coal ash dump that was Willets Point. But it was never raised out of the floodplain. And as a result of being in the floodplain, it's impossible to put infrastructure like sewers and electric lines and gas lines into the roadbed because they would literally sink into the water. So what we have to do in order to remediate and in order to put that infrastructure in, you literally have to clear the whole site, you have to wipe it clean, and then you have to surcharge the land by about 5 to 6 feet on average, and then build on top of that. And once you do that, then you can put in the infrastructure. It won't be in the floodplain anymore, and it will be developable. And that's what we're planning on doing. That's what the money in the budget is for. And we think that in addition to being able to relocate the businesses that are currently there to places where they actually can have, for example, bathrooms, these places have to have porta potties because you don't have sewers going to the businesses. In addition to relocating most of those jobs, we're going to create on net far more jobs. And coming back to a point that you were making about displacement, in terms of the housing here, this is 35% of this housing, which is about 5,000 units, are going to be affordable. There is one person who lives in Willets Point now. So we're not displacing, we're displacing one person, and we're creating 4,000 to 5,000 new units of housing, 35% of which are affordable. So that's a huge net gain.
Lower Manhattan is currently, I guess, known as a huge financial sector, I guess, for the city. I was wondering how the current financial crisis is affecting Lower Manhattan, and if you see, I guess, what do you see as the future for Lower Manhattan?
Well, Wall Street has been moving away from Wall Street for probably 50 years. But the financial service industry still is a heavy user of and an important component of Lower Manhattan. There's no question about it that this downturn is going to have a negative impact on Lower Manhattan. Merrill Lynch is headquartered there. That was acquired by Bank of America. It's likely many, if not all, of those jobs will eventually move to Midtown, where Bank of America's investment banking headquarters is. AIG is located in Lower Manhattan. We know about AIG. Goldman Sachs is located in Lower Manhattan. Fortunately, they've been spared a lot of the downturn, but they've been laying off people too. So there's no way that it won't have an impact on Lower Manhattan. One of the good things about Lower Manhattan over the last 7 or 8 years has been that its economy has diversified in 2 ways. First of all, a lot of businesses that weren't financial services related have moved into Lower Manhattan. Not enough, I don't think, yet to make up for the loss of financial services jobs. But that's a trend that I think will continue. The other is that Lower Manhattan has become much more of a 24/7 community than it was before. There was a lot of Class B and even more importantly Class C office space in Lower Manhattan in the late 90s that was sitting empty, and much of that was converted to residential space. It's actually one of the fastest growing residential communities in the country. I think it now has something like 35,000 residents. And so I think that that's going to be an important stabilizer, because what we've found in our economic development analysis is that people want to work near where they live. And so if you have a core residential community, I think that will help attract businesses, especially creative businesses, because you have a lot of young people who are living down there. So, the financial services industry goes through booms and busts. It's likely that a good portion of the jobs that have been lost will eventually come back to Lower Manhattan in that industry. But like with the rest of the city, we're going to have to diversify the economy of Lower Manhattan so that it's not so singularly reliant on financial services. And that's really one of the things that we're trying to do with these entrepreneurial initiatives. Because it's hard for us to say, we think this is the industry that's going to be the winner, or this is the industry. There are certain areas where New York has natural advantages, and we're investing in those. But what I think is the best thing that government can do when it comes to diversifying the economy is to create the condition for smart people to start businesses that do whatever it is that they think the future is going to demand, and to let the market decide this one's a winner, this one's a loser. And so that's really what we're working to do, is create those conditions. We're cutting taxes on smaller businesses. We're looking to increase the amount of investment in small startup businesses. We're looking to create new office space, incubator space at low cost for people to start businesses. And I think that's the future of Lower Manhattan, and that's the future of the city. It's in industries that we probably don't even know exist.
Thank you. Do you see the role of partnership for New York City as a redundant role, or do you see it as a competitive role? I do not know anything about that organization. How is it structured? How much money does it have? And how much good does it do to your charter?
Well, it's a business partnership that's made up of a number of leading corporations in the city. There are chambers of commerce around the city. I don't think of them certainly as competitors. We work very cooperatively with all of the chambers of commerce in the city. We work very cooperatively with the partnership. They bring their own set of perspectives and resources, and working in partnership with them, we've been able to produce some, I think, really important results. In terms of their economics, that I'm not sure about. I think they're reasonably well funded, and as I said, serve an important role. But it's a role that's complementary to us.
The history of New York City's physical development is grossly intertwined with the history of transportation investment in New York City. And I'm wondering if you could speak about the current stalemate with the MTA. They've just voted now to raise fares tremendously, and there's a stalemate in Albany. With all of the projects that you currently have online, most of them are centered on housing, creating more office space. But could you talk more about what type of interface you've had with the MTA about future transportation development that would help to underpin all these projects beyond the extension of the 7 train?
Well, the unfortunate thing is that a lot of what makes New York work is outside of the city's control. The Port Authority is a bi-state entity that's controlled by New Jersey and New York. The MTA is largely controlled by the state of New York. I think we're all concerned about the stalemate in Albany on many different issues, but MTA certainly being an important one. I mean, New York can't function without our public transportation system, and anything that makes it either more expensive or less efficient is a huge problem. And we last year went to the legislature with our own proposal to solve the MTA's capital problem, which was the congestion pricing proposal, which is not all that different in effect than the Ravitch proposal, which they're talking about now, which involved putting tolls on East River bridges, essentially making you pay to come into Manhattan. We think that that's the right answer. You make people who drive cars into the city and create congestion pay for the improvements that hopefully will make more people take public transportation. What we're doing in the meantime is what we can, which is planning around existing transportation infrastructure. So we're very focused on areas like Queens Plaza in Long Island City, which is extremely well served by subways, Jamaica, which is both served by the Long Island Railroad and subways, but also by the air train, and therefore really can serve as an airport village to JFK. We're working on developments along the East River and building new ferry landings, which we think are another form of public transportation that has great growth potential. We recently inaugurated a new ferry service from the Rockaways to Sunset Park and to Lower Manhattan, so that's another initiative on that front. So we're big supporters of transit-oriented development. Willets Point is another example. It's well served by both Long Island Railroad and the subways. We're huge supporters of that. Where we can do something, we are, and where we don't have a direct voice, certainly the mayor has been out there very publicly saying that Albany's got to solve this problem, because this is a big problem, not just for the city, but for the state.
When you create these development zones like Willets Point and Hunters Point, in many cases you displace industrial and manufacturing jobs, which are a great employment opportunity for New York City's middle and lower income residents. And you talk about making New York City this great place to live and to attract the best and brightest, but my question is where will all these businesses go, and where will these lower and middle income residents work after all this new development?
Well, as I said, taking Willets Point as an example, we think that we're going to not only relocate most of the jobs that are there, give them opportunities, actually these businesses, to expand, which they don't have in Willets Point, allow them to operate more efficiently because they're now going to have the infrastructure that they need. But we're also going to create new jobs in their place. We were working very hard to increase manufacturing and distribution jobs within the city. We have enormous efforts that we're undertaking, for example, in Hunts Point in the South Bronx, which is the largest food distribution center in the Western Hemisphere. There are about 10,000 people who are employed on and around our facility at Hunts Point. We're working, by way of example, with the produce market, which is the source of most of the fresh fruits and vegetables to corner stores and bodegas throughout the city. So it's a very important link in the supply chain for lower income New Yorkers for their fresh fruits and vegetables. We're working with them to try to expand and modernize their facility. That facility was built in the 1960s and was probably out of date when it was built. We've also recently put in a new Fulton fish market in the Bronx, which improves the safety of the fish and has led to increases in jobs in that market. We're working in Sunset Park in Brooklyn, putting a major recycling business along the piers in Sunset Park. We are working to bring back the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal, which is a break bulk shipping facility which has been vacant since the 1960s. In Staten Island, we're working to expand the New York Container Terminal, which is actually one of the largest container port terminals in the city. We're looking to expand that by 75%. We've been working with the Port Authority on that. So we have a number of initiatives that are meant to address exactly that issue, because we agree with you. We can't be an economy that's just made up of office workers. We can't be an economy that's only service workers. We have to have a diversified economy, and we've got to have opportunities for people with less education and maybe fewer skills to be able to make a living wage, and the best way for them to make a living wage is through manufacturing and distribution jobs. That's historically been the case, and we think that's going to be the case going forward. So we're working on that as well. So I don't think you'll find any disagreement. There are certain places that we think could be better served with other uses, and where that's been the case, we've tried to relocate that businesses, and I think those businesses, and I think we have generally good track record on that.
I would argue that the best way to ensure that we have a living wage is to pass a living wage ordinance, which is sort of a segue to my question, which is, the Commission on Economic Opportunities has really identified the rise in the working poor as sort of a defining problem of this generation. But a bunch of the projects that you're boasting about, incentivize the creation of poverty wage jobs. So, and we've been through this discussion a million times, but I guess I'm wondering if there's any progress toward or any interest from EDC in really incorporating the quality of jobs as criteria for subsidies. I know it's included in the application, but to really attach conditions to subsidies to guarantee living wages.
Well, it's a tough issue because on the one hand, I agree with you that we would hope that every job that we create is a job that allows people to live well. And the fact is that there are jobs in this city. There are lots of jobs in the city and the country and the world where people are paid amounts where that's not the case. I think that if you look at the projects that we've created, that they've ended up creating tens of thousands of unionized jobs, all of which pay more than living wages. Attaching a requirement, though, attaches an expense to a project. And the problem is that most of the time what we're trying to do is induce people in the private sector to invest their money with a very small investment of city resources. And one of the ways that we've been successful with that is by allowing those people who are actually putting their capital at risk to make the decisions about the kinds of tenancies that they put in. If we were to require, for example, a developer of a shopping facility to require that all workers in the shopping facility have living wages, although that in theory sounds like a great idea, and if it could work, would be wonderful. The problem is you would probably not find one retailer who'd be willing to lease that space because almost all retailers pay lower wages than living wage. And so the question then becomes, is it better not to have those jobs at all, to have the jobs at the wages that they pay? And we recently have been going through a discussion on this topic at the Kingsbridge Armory in the Bronx, where members of the community have asked us to require that the developer who's going to redevelop that for a shopping facility, they've asked us to put a living wage requirement. We issued an RFP and we said that anyone who agrees that they will put a living wage requirement on this development will be considered a far more advantageous respondent than anyone who doesn't. And not one developer responded saying that they were willing to do that. So the choice is really a false one as between the living wage and non-living wage. It's really between living wage and no project at all. And from our perspective, the 1,200 jobs that are going to be created at the Kingsbridge Armory in an economy like this, at whatever wages they end up being, and a lot of them will be living wage, but whatever wages they'll be at are better than the 0 jobs that are located there now. I'll take one more question.
Hi, you mentioned about diversifying employment, and I know that the NYCEDC team has been quick to point out the employment benefits of the various sustainability initiatives that are bundled within that. I wondered if you had any specific programs for green jobs or research or anything that you've done.
Yeah, we're actually working right now on one of our many studies is on how can we induce more green technology jobs in the city. One of the things, we just had a meeting about this yesterday, and one of the things that our team is struggling with is what exactly does that mean? Everyone talks about green jobs, but nobody can define it. If I buy my Dell computer and it's more energy efficient than the Dell computer I bought 2 years ago, is Dell computer a green business? Maybe it is, maybe it's not. So we're working on trying to define what it is that we're aiming for. And then we're going to announce a set of initiatives that will be geared towards growing that sector. We are hoping to have something to announce sometime late April, early May, so I'll have much more that I can say about that then we've got, I think, some pretty interesting ideas, but they're probably half-baked at this point. But we are doing a number of things on the green front in the meantime. I mentioned with Willett's Point that development will be the first LEED certified neighborhood in the city of New York. So we think that all of the investment that's going towards that should really be viewed in a lot of ways as a green investment. We're working on the properties that we have across the city to figure out ways to make them more energy efficient. So for example, at the Brooklyn Army Terminal, which EDC manages, it's about 5 million square feet. And the problem that you have in landlord buildings that are tenanted by separate buildings, separate entities, is that there are split incentives. The landlords have to put in the money to make the building green, but the tenant will get most of the benefits because they tend to pay for the energy usage. We, I think, have come up with a model that will help break that logjam. We've been working with a energy efficiency company and hope to have something that we can announce sometime this summer, but that will substantially reduce the energy usage and will also be an economic boon, not just to our tenants, but to us as the landlords as well. And that's something we hope will be a model across the city. And we're looking at initiatives really throughout all of our properties that are similar to that. So, we think that the future of the city has to be a green future. New York is already one of the most energy efficient cities, if not the most energy efficient city in the country. But it's got to do even better, because if the city's economy is going to continue to grow, if our population is going to continue to grow, given the fact that there's only so much space and there are only so many places you can put power plants and the other kinds of resources that we need, we've got to do it more efficiently. And that's been one of the top priorities of the administration and will remain that way.
Please join me in thanking Seth.